For landlords, by landlords. The Rent Perfect Podcast with David Pickron.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the Rent Perfect Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about what causes evictions. I mean, something that scares us a lot. Joined here by Denny Dobbins, who's had a wonderful career in the world of landlord-tenant law, have seen thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of evictions. He's our legal counsel here at Rent Perfect. Hopefully you've watched the podcast and seen him before. Welcome, Denny. How are you doing this morning?
Good to be here.
Awesome. Now, being a landlord and being by your side for 30 years, I do know the number one reason for the volume of evictions is non-payment of rent, which Rent Perfect really tries to help you find the right people so we can get rid of that possible eviction. But second to that, I want to talk about over your career, what have you seen that has causing landlords grief? What are they doing that possibly causes the evictions?
I think there's a number of things. It's not easy to boil down in a single element, but I think there's a lot of ignorance, training.
Okay.
They don't know many times what the rules are, what the laws are. And sometimes the laws and the rules are a little bit counterintuitive.
Now we're talking the landlord doesn't know what the rules and the laws are.
Doesn't
okay,
know
because there's really
rules
no school we go to. There's really no big book across the United States that we can read and know everything, correct?
Right.
That's why we need you.
Yeah, the tenants, they don't know almost anything. And the landlords, a lot of times, especially new landlords, they struggle because, the multifamily, they get a lot of training.
Gotcha.
There's lots that they can go to and forced to go to. They have to go get the training.
Right.
But our client base for Rent Perfect, because we try to help those who are not getting that kind of training.
Right.
That's a little bit different story. And so one of the biggest things, at least in my opinion, over the years, especially dealing with single-family dwellings, the expectations of the communication in those expectations, many times the landlord doesn't explain what's in that lease, and the tenants don't really know. And so when there's a problem, you got to go, well, the tenants go, I didn't know that,
Okay.
And now they're trying to figure out how to make it work. So, and you've had a lot of experience with this part about, okay, what do you explain to your tenants? What do you explain to them?
So the first thing that I come is I believe in that over-communicate. Over-communicate, not about life. I don't want you talking about a lot of things outside of this relationship, but it is a relationship, and so communications, like you said, I think is important. So what I normally do is I give them a criteria at the very first time I show the property. So I'm communicating to them what I'm going to expect. And I've massaged that criteria over the years to almost be a summary of the lease, almost like this is what I expect. These are the timelines I expected. This is going to be, in the lease. But things like no smoking, things like no pets, that seems obvious. We might put them in our ads on the social media or online somewhere, and we say no smoking, no pets, but they forget that. We go and we show the property. We don't hand them a summary sheet or the criteria sheet that I'm talking about. We forget to talk about pets because we figure that's already been talked about.
And many times you assume they know.
Yeah. And then day one we show up and there's an additional pet or there's an additional occupant that I didn't know about that's moving in with them that no one ever talked about. And so I think communication starts with showing that property and with that criteria sheet that you give them, which is really becoming a summary of your lease. And so when you get to your lease, you're really not running into, I didn't know that. And so I think communication really, you nailed it, starts from the very beginning when you very first show your property or even have the conversation over the phone. Now, you don't want to pre-qualify them. You don't want to do anything discriminatory, so you got to be real careful. I say over-communicate, and then in a way, I want you to be very careful with your communications. But communications, I think, are something that get people in trouble. So I've had it where I show up to sign the lease. When I showed the property, the guy didn't smell like a smoker, right? But when I show up, he's sitting out by his car, and I'm ready to go release with him. I'm like, he's a smoker. I could have killed that a long time ago, and now I have to say, you realize you can't even smoke on property, not just in the house, because I think he was under the impression, I won't smoke in the house, I'll smoke on the back patio, but my lease is nowhere on the property. And so we had to have that tough conversation, and we're already far down the road. I've already passed up a couple people that wanted to rent my place, thinking I already have my next, what I call my business partner, my next tenant, because my communications wasn't crystal clear.
Right. Well, I also like to do the same thing with the crime-free addendum. I like to give that with the criteria and say, look, here's crime-free addendum. Go over this because while you're here, while you're at the property, there can't be any criminal activity.
Yeah, and I think that's a phenomenal add into that criteria, and I think I'm going to take your suggestion on that. I'm going to add some crime-free language in on that criteria. You know, it's so funny. We want to communicate, we want to educate, we want to be clear on our communications, but all of a sudden we make the summary just as long as the lease, then the summary isn't going to be very effective.
Yeah.
So other than giving them maybe the whole crime-free addendum, I think I'll add 2 or 3 sentences in there that really get to the heart of you cannot commit crimes while on this property, on or off the property. And I think that's a great suggestion. So thanks for giving me that today.
I do have one story. I'll tell a story about one of the cases I had with the Attorney General's office in one of the states. And this was a situation where a family came in to take a tour of the property and met the manager at the property, and they wanted to, see the property and see if it's going to work for them. And they came in. There was a man and a woman, same age.
Okay.
And there were 7 kids with them.
Okay.
And they went to the property to tour the property, and the manager said, "Well, I don't think we can do this. I think we've already rented this out. He saw 7 kids. It's a 2-bedroom home.
Right.
It's a small home.
Right.
Yeah, we've rented this thing out, and we're not going to be able to do this. So
Right.
Sorry, take up your time." Well, they went and filed a claim
Okay.
for familial discrimination, and they happened to be babysitting for their brother and sister-in-law,
Okay.
and they only had 1 child. The rest of them were their brother and sister-in-law's kids that they were watching while they were, on vacation.
So they weren't even their kids, but the manager's
They
making
weren't their
all kinds
kids,
of
but
assumptions.
making the assumptions in their
Right.
head, and had they had that talk before, here's kind of what we're going to be looking for, and
Right.
that and they said, well, we didn't want to say, are these your kids? That would be discriminatory.
Right.
Well, that's where you make it clear. You still bring them on the tour. You still let them see the home,
Right.
but you make it very clear right there in this document that you would give them. Well, here's the criteria.
Right.
2 persons, per bedroom, that type of thing.
If that's what your criteria
If that's what
and
it
falls
is.
in your
If
state
that's what
laws,
it is. Yeah,
yes,
if it falls
absolutely.
in state laws. But he could have cleared it up right there instead
Right.
of putting himself in that terrible position of having to now defend
Right.
himself with the Attorney General's
Right.
office.
Exactly. So we have 2 people, 2 bedroom. It's a 3-bedroom. 6 people can, 2 people per bedroom. They'd really quickly go, oh, there's only 3 of us moving in. Oh, yeah, you thought these were my kid? No, I'm just babies. I mean, you would have really
Exactly.
quickly done that. But I understand why people are cautious to ask any questions about that too, because it's just this, we're dang if we do, dang if we don't in this business. But I agree. I think communications is so key and keeps us out of a lot of problems. Even if it doesn't go to eviction, just having that communication with your tenant makes it a much easier and better experience than to constantly looking at your phone going, oh, here we go again, right? And I've had that many times where I'm just like, I just can't take this phone call right now, which I usually will take the phone call, but I have that thought in my head about, oh, this is not going to be great.
Well, I've seen way too many landlords say, okay, well, here's a lease agreement. Here's the application, sign the application. We'll get the lease agreement going. Okay, we'll get the lease, get the money.
Mm-hmm.
We're going. We got a lease.
Mm-hmm.
There's no expectation. There's no communication. you're so concerned about getting the money for the lease.
Right.
It's kind of like the rich guy who makes a whole lot of money, works really, really hard, and never protects his money. He just makes money, but he doesn't protect it. And so now he's got lawsuits going, and his money's just out there for the taking. And that's kind of like what we do sometimes with rentals is, the landlord, they're the one on the hook for this property. It's their investment, and they don't take enough charge of it to make sure that what they're basically giving this asset to somebody, say, please take care of my asset, but they don't do anything to communicate that to the
and I think that's a good point, because over the years, I've always preached that we wear two hats. We're an investor and we buy the rental properties. We want to invest our money, so we're really good. We're like, I want to invest my money. I want another piece of property. I want to get the appreciation, the rental, all this stuff. And then a lot of times we don't like to take that investor hat off and become a property manager or a landlord or whatever your designation is, because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it takes time. And, hey, how fantastic is it to have an investment that you put on autopilot and never have to deal with? And you can do that to a sense, but starting this relationship needs total communication, over-communication, all the way through, showing the property, giving them a criteria, getting them ready to move in. Everybody needs to be completely on the same page. And then I think you go over the lease with them. I have them, even though I have them digitally sign the lease, they sign every single page. Now, whether they read it or not, I can't make that happen. But I make sure we are completely on the same page before I give you the keys. And at that point then, I can kind of put it on autopilot. But if you put it on autopilot at the beginning, like you're saying, hey, here's the whatever, just get in, here's your money, get in the lease, you might find that causes you some problems down the road. So other than non-payment of rent, I think your communication and your documentation, documenting everything, is going to get you the most trouble in those evictions that usually are non-payment of rent type of misunderstanding evictions. And I know you've seen many of those. And I know you've seen many of those because your lease covers a lot of that you've made over the years.
Right. It's a 35-year lease. So, you just keep adding things to the lease. Every time you got a problem, you want to make sure that this is covered. Right. Both parties are supposed to know now.
Right.
You assume that they read it all.
Yeah.
Very few people read the whole lease. Very few tenants read the whole lease, but it's their responsibility. We can't do it for them.
No, absolutely. But I think the same people aren't going to read a 3-page lease that aren't going to read a 37-page lease. So you might as well have one that covers you when you need it. So there I am on my communication and my lease requirements on my rentals. And if this sounds good, implement it into your rentals. I think I'm going to add some crime-free addendum into my criteria. Thanks for that suggestion today. And then we're going to try to tamper the criteria down. We don't want it to become a 37-page criteria, because then we absolutely are going to have the same problem. So criteria should be highlight your communication that you really want to highlight. No smoking, no pets, timelines, no criminal activity, and then let them read the boilerplate lease later with all the other fine-tuned kind of rules and regulations.
I will tell you one thing about doing it the way you're talking about doing it and helping landlords understand that's how it needs to be done, is that if you do wind up getting in court with a situation on a particular issue, you're going to be able to testify, Judge, this is something we discussed early on.
Right.
Even before they entered into the lease, I explained this to them. We talked about it. They said they understood it. We talked about this specifically.
Right.
And that's going to go a long way, where somebody says, well, I didn't know about that, because you have some judges that say, oh, well, they didn't read it, they didn't know. Right. No, it's more than that, Judge. Yeah. This is something specific that we cover, because this is the very thing that we don't want to happen. And here we are today, and it happened because they chose not to take the advice and not to follow the rules.
Well, if I went to court, then the way I manage it would, Your Honor, when I first met them, I handed them a copy of this criteria, this summary of the lease. I had them initial it.
Exhibit 1.
Exhibit 1, the very first day we met, this was in front of them.
Exhibit 2.
Right. Exhibit 2. Here's the lease. Now, this is a little bit more extensive a document, more legalese type of stuff. They signed every page of that, and what is the defense on that? I mean, I didn't read it.
It's not a good defense.
I mean, the judge is painted into a corner. He's like, I really like the defendant. I'd like to help him, but there's such a case here that I can't. I've got to rule for the landlord no matter what.
Yeah, the only thing that a judge could do is if something in your lease just totally absurd, totally unreasonable, total unreasonable burden on the tenant.
Right.
A judge could say, yeah, that's great, but I'm not going to enforce that.
Right.
But we don't do that. Everything we do is reasonable, straightforward, in English. We don't do legalese. You know.
Right.
We want the tenant to understand exactly what they're about to do.
Right.
It's the whole idea.
Yep. So if you do this, you will have great relationships with your tenants. I'm not saying you're going to be best friends. I don't want you to be best friends, but to lay out that communications and be, on the same page will greatly benefit you. And then it will allow you to put it on autopilot later so you don't really have to think about your rental once it's going and they're just paying you rent. So we thank you, Denny. Appreciate your advice and all those years of service, and give us all your great paragraphs in the lease that protect us landlords. And until next time, continue to rent perfect.